Welcome to Storytime with ALN Academy. My name is Rutendo Nyaku, a rule of law advisor at ALN Academy. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by Dr. Michael Sitawa, who is a researcher in peace and security and an ardent follower of peace and security matters, who believes really in ensuring a world with peace and stability. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Michael,
Yes.
tell us about yourself.
Wonderful. The name is Michael Sitawa Muga. I am a researcher, as you rightly mentioned, in the area of peace and security. Schooled at a university level, Catholic University of Eastern Africa, where I did my BA in sociology, major, minor in political science. I went ahead to do my master's at the University of Nairobi, and that is where I did my community development and rural sociology, after which then I went to do my PhD at Kenyatta University, where I got a PhD in sociology. My work career spans from the beginning of it at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, where I was for a period of 10 years, after which I went to the International Peace Support Training Center. I was there for about 3 years, and God has been gracious enough. I transitioned on to the Institute for Security Studies, where I currently am. And on the side, I do research consultancies on matters of peace and security. So today, I am privileged to be here in my individual capacity as a researcher on those matters.
Right.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, Michael, there's a lot of upheaval globally right now. The geopolitical shifts that are happening, and these geopolitical shifts are not just happening outside, just happening elsewhere in the world, but we're also seeing some of these shifts happening within Africa. We've seen the coups in West Africa, the collapse of ECOWAS in the East African region, and SADC, I suppose, if we put it that way. There's also the issue of the conflict in the DRC, and most recently also the conflict with Mozambique. So what I want to know is, what are the greatest challenges for economic cooperation as well as peace and stability in Africa right now?
Wonderful. Thank you for the question. It might be the greatest challenge facing a continent on matters economic cooperation is a realist approach to issues of economic development, where states tend to look inwards, and over that we are seeing a breeding of suspicion between states, and that then incubates certain it slackens the development process, the development agenda, going to the regional level and on towards the continent. Equally, as you rightly observe, the issue of instability is a big issue, for the very reason that whenever you have war, everything stops. Whenever you have war, you lose ground. Whenever you have war, the human resource element will suffer. Infrastructure takes a beating. And then we have got to talk of post-conflict reconstruction. While others are advancing, there are states that are discussing the reconstruction aspect of issues. So that then hampers issues to do with cooperation, because if you're looking at regional economic communities, regional mechanisms, advancing development together, whenever one partner faces issues to do with instability, the shocks reverberate across the region. I also observed that on the issue of the RECs, we do have RECs and regional mechanisms with overlapping mandates. This therefore means that we tend to dispense more to do the same thing, and that cuts back on efficiency. Equally, then there is the aspect of competition that then again slackens the entire process of economic cooperation and development. On to your next question of peace and stability, I do observe with concern that there is the aspect of climate change and climate variability. We are in very unprecedented times, and my humble analysis or view of the situation is that the world did not expect climate change to hit us this hard. And especially for the African continent, we are the least polluters. We emit only 4% of the greenhouse gas, yet we are bearing the most brunt. We also observe that for the issue of peace and stability, there is the aspect of the youth bulge. We have a huge chunk or a good percentage of our population in Africa as being largely youth. Question is, where can they be absorbed meaningfully? We observe that they are quite woke and they are keen on what is considered as their right. So by extension, we find ourselves facing a wave of youth pressure that is potentially having the capacity to destabilize governments. I also observe on the aspect of, onto the other one I'd mentioned on economic cooperation, issues to do with human resource.
Yeah.
The continent has some work to do when it comes to curbing literacy levels. There are countries, of course, that are way higher than others in terms of literacy levels, but there are those that are quite behind. One statistic is that Africa's population is 18% of the global population. But we do find ourselves looking at a situation whereby 72% of the global population that is illiterate is in the continent. What can we do about it? And how does that affect, again, our cooperation? You realize that we cannot as effectively interrogate the development agenda as we would if the education levels and literacy levels were at par. Yes.
You know, Michael, you've just raised two things for me that I am finding quite concerning. Because this instability that's happening sort of in Africa, or at least can I call them shifts, are happening at the same time as the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. You know, there's already trading under the Guided Trade Initiative.
Indeed.
And then, so what you're telling me now is we're seeing countries turning inwards, which is bad for economic cooperation, at the same time that we're seeing this continental agreement that people have worked on for so many years to finally get it up and running. What does this actually mean? And at the same time, when you're telling me about the literacy levels, 72% you said,
Yes.
it means that there's human capital, because, you know, we have the biggest youth population in the world. So there's human capital which is underutilized, not educated adequately, all right, and is not being fully utilized in countries that are turning inward at the same time as we have a continental free trade area that, you know, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is complicated, as you've seen me trying to unpack it.
I hear it is quite complicated, as you rightly observe. The aspect of states facing pressure from the citizenry to deliver on, say, campaign promises is quite real. By extension, some states would then revert to using mechanisms that would now look more inwards, as opposed to opening up themselves to, say, issues with investment and so on and so forth, connectivity, or you would have some form of unfair competition, if I may use the term, cutting across a number of states. We are best placed to posture ourselves as a continent or as regional blocks when it comes to engaging the superpowers, the big countries. Why? Because when they come to negotiate, if we are able to negotiate a package as a block, we find ourselves better positioned. But negotiating bilaterally sometimes disadvantages nation states within the continent. And what equally is notable is that when it comes to the movement of the free movement within the continent, it is not very easy to travel this continent. If I may cite the words of Aliko Dangote, he once said he required so many visas just to move around Africa.
And he's the wealthiest guy.
Exactly. He's not coming to beg, he's coming to invest.
Yeah.
But he said when he goes to Europe, he just needs one visa.
Yeah.
Schengen visa, and he's good to go. So these are some of the bottlenecks that, in my view, I would argue that are making us post as if we are looking inwards, and that then hurts the integration, the realization of the Africa future, the continental agreement. Yes.
Would you say that, the at least where the political shifts are happening or the political instabilities that are happening can happen side by side with sort of a greater effort towards that economic integration that we just spoke about? Can these two things happen at the same time, such that maybe one would create stability for the other, at least,
I am of the impression that you're oscillating towards the democratic space.
Yeah, like for instance with the European Union, where, the of course, when it was being established, there was differing political situations, but that pursuit of the economic cooperation integration ended up making it a question of, if we let these political situations continue the way they are, this thing is going to collapse.
Sure.
Mutually assured destruction in that way.
Yes.
So in Africa, would this be something that we can pursue? Is this something we can do side by side?
So it's an interesting dynamic you bring to it. Africa may need time to get to the point where we can talk of ceding some of the quote-unquote political powers to certain authorities
Yeah.
central to the leadership of the continent. However, it's not to say that we shall have to wait too long. There are certain moves that within the democratic space can be made. And key to it is capacity building the population to understand the real meaning of democracy.
Yeah.
Okay, because we do have a large part of our population that believes that democracy is all about votes, voting. There's a lot more to that spectrum of democracy. We call them, there is rule by the people.
Yeah.
So issues of policy formulation, issues of public participation can come in quite strongly. And in my view, to journey with the entire African population, for the African continent to journey as one, it is important to have the engagement of the population in matters public participation.
Yeah.
I strongly celebrate the Constitution of Kenya on matters of public participation. Okay, it is quite elaborate, and from time to time we do see the government making some attempts to that. This is something that, in my view, is important. The masses come out, they express their views on certain issues, and the government then takes it up from there. So it's something that can be considered across the board. I believe we can create the space and the required forum where we can have civilized and structured engagement, constructive as well.
I mean,
Yes.
just in terms of what you're raising of public participation in an earlier conversation, I know you're a big fan of dialogue.
I still am, yes.
Big fan of dialogue. And I think what I will want to know is what initiatives in your day-to-day sort of life, in your work, in you're doing, are you taking sort of to increase that type of dialogue and that public participation, to really make the issue of peace, peace and democracy, security and stability an everyday conversation for people?
Wonderful. Yes, I do engage in some works in my modest capacity.
Yeah.
On matters peace and security, fronting the dialogue agenda.
Yeah.
While at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, I started publishing them. And in several of my publications, I categorically point to the need for dialogue as opposed to hard power approaches to getting peace and stability. So I've been part of the editorial board of the International Journal for Social and Development Concerns. As when I went to the International Peace Support Training Center, I was privileged to be the editor-in-chief of the Africa Money Journal.
Yeah.
where throughout my publications, again, I insist on the import of dialogue. I also have had the honor of publishing the NDUK Journal, National Defense University Kenya Journal, and the Kenya Defense Forces Journal. Specifically, the Kenya Defense Forces Journal, I argue for the use of soft power approaches in asymmetric theaters of conflict. I'm a strong believer that we can always negotiate things out. We do not have to go the robust, peace enforcement way. Why? Because once you dialogue, you do get the chance to understand each other. And on the platform of dialogue and understanding, you can build a lot more out of that. I also do take part in various conferences. The latest being one that took place in Canada, the University of Algoma. And out of this, again, I presented I pitched the investment in food security as one of the disaster risk reduction coping mechanisms to support youth employment and stability within the DRC.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
it's good that you speak on negotiation and dialogue, but I really, if I'm a person watching this right now and I'm like, hey, this guy is talking about soft power, what, how does that look like for me? If I'm a business leader, if I'm an activist, if I'm just a regular, professional person reading the news and concerned about what's happening, what is this soft power thing? What does that look like?
Wonderful. Soft power basically is the opposite of what I would consider as hard power. Soft power is giving time to a process whereby there is more of negotiation and more of engaging in interventionist approaches to conflict, where you do not come in and take a hard stand on the side, and, if I may add, deploy the military assets towards neutralization on the spot. No, we get to sit down and discuss and understand the root causes of this conflict. We dare ask ourselves the 5 whys that made Toyota what it is today. Equally, the beauty of soft power is that it gives room for other pillars of human security to flourish.
Yeah.
As you discuss, we talk of agreeing to ceasefire. Out of that, you have economic security that can then begin to gain traction. You have food security that can equally begin to gain traction. Health security, among the various other pillars of security. So, for me, soft power, for example, in the case of the Eastern DRC, when the East Africa Community Regional Force deployed, is one classic case where soft power was used. Those same soldiers who were sent there to stabilize the East were engaged in various initiatives, including the provision of health support to the population. It was so shocking that within 3 months, without firing a single bullet, we saw a situation whereby the M23 group had then begun talking of going into the cantonment zones. That since then has not happened. And it will take a similar approach to have them have such a discussion. So in my view, it is the most productive approach to peace. And more so, it is the most sustainable approach to peace. Yes.
I want to just touch a little bit on that, because my question is really around which actors can facilitate this type of a dialogue, because as much as there's a lot of physical and violent conflict, what you're saying is true, that the conflict doesn't start from nowhere, right? Conflicts start because they are groups that are aggrieved,
Indeed.
who have valid concerns. There are parties who feel that those concerns may or may not be valid, but the platform or the forum to discuss may not always be there or may not always be facilitated in the right possible way. So in this, in this scenario we find ourselves in Africa right now, where so many countries are at conflict at the same time, with many regional actors, with many state actors, such that it's not a localized conflict anymore. Who brings all of these actors together to actually have this dialogue so that there's no further misunderstandings?
Who will be best placed to bring in, to understand, or to bring the warring parties to the conflict? I'm an added believer for African solutions to African problems. Why do I say this? We understand each other.
Yeah.
We understand one another quite well, and it is only best that we exploit that very understanding of each other to interrogate the issues that plague us. I do have respect for external actors supporting peace processes. However, the aspect of the ownership becomes more or less of a challenge. Homegrown solutions in many cases do have some significant degree of sustainability, and states can, quote unquote, what I would say, lean on to each other for support. Okay. We do have our conflict and your early warning systems. They are in place. We are the best ones to monitor these systems and respond accordingly to them. We cannot rule out the fact that sometimes when you have external actors coming in, you may have a case where there are hidden interests that therefore could protract talks, that could also mean some form of back chatting that would force one of the partners or both partners to posture in a manner not very comfortable to them. But my belief is that when Africans would sit down to discuss their own issues, we understand each other. We should be in position to provide our own solutions to the problems that affect us.
I'm just, without just saying, reflecting on, just gave me an example that just came to mind, is the role that the women's interfaith groups in Liberia played to bring the warring parties to the table. Say, listen, it's too much. It's too much.
Yes.
And it was a big population, it was interfaith, it was women from different, sort of tribes, cultures, whatever, but there was that shared interest that this conflict is affecting all of us, in different ways, but it's affecting us.
Yes.
And they could agree on that, and they could agree on the fact that they wanted peace and, according to their context. So when you say that, and I'm just thinking about the fact that the inter aspect of, creating dialogue is so important, whether it's through interfaith dialogues,
Indeed.
inter-business dialogue, because there's only so much that diplomacy can do. There's only so much that, the political can play, because the diplomatic and the political they're not living in a bubble. They're not on an island.
Oh, yes.
Right? There's the civil society, as he mentioned. There are people who have business interests. There are people who, they're just there trying to make their cross-border trading in peace. They're informal traders. You know what I'm saying? So I really value what you just said right now, because I'm actually realizing that dialogue really does come from even parties who don't seem like they hold all the power, just coming together, having a discussion, finding common ground on how they are affected and, sort of where to go.
Yes.
But then now I have a question for you. You're giving me solutions, but also you're making me have questions. And I suppose the question now is, for you, what are the hopes for this continent? Like, what are the aspirations? We know from peace processes that have lasted that there's ways, the dialogue we just mentioned, right? And there are lessons to learn from conflicts that have emerged. So what are the hopes and aspirations? What should we look forward to now?
Brilliant. My hopes and aspirations are that the ruling class in the continent can integrate as fast as the cross-border communities.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? You have a Maasai in Kenya who can walk into Tanzania to say hi to the Kazi. You have a Muluya in Western who can cross over into Uganda to say hi to the brother and sister. Same case in the case of the DRC. When you have a funeral in Goma, you will get guests from Rwanda. When you have a baby shower in Gisenyi, Rwanda, you will get guests from Goma. So what I'm basically trying to point out here is that the cross-border communities are a perfect model that we can all emulate because they integrated way back. My hope is that the political class can match that and even do better because they are resourced as well as mandated. I also hope to see a continent that can power itself sufficiently. I look at, in the case of the Congo, we have the Inga dam, the need to construct the Inga 2 dam that would very easily power the entire continent. All right. I, on the same note, would hope that we posture ourselves as a continent to handle the climate change issues in-house. What do I mean by this? Climate change is a serious security threat, and we have got to begin considering fighting back the deserts as faster than they are forming. I would like to appreciate a model by the Kenya Defense Forces. They have a model called a program called the Environmental Soldier Program. What this program is set to do is to have a mission-ready force that is actively engaged in reforesting the desertified parts of the country and reclamation or rehabilitation of the water towers. What does this mean? We are, as a country, able then to talk of taming future climate-related conflicts. Looking at the Africa Union Security Sector Reform Policy Framework of 2014, there is a mention of climate change. But my very humble submission and hope is that we can upscale this environmental soldier program that is being done in Kenya to be adopted across other armies, other militaries, and appreciate the fact that climate change, or rather the job of the army, is not only to fight wars and support territorial integrity in its physical sense, but equally forestall conflicts. Yes. Equally, my hope is that we can have a continent that embraces the rule of law, a continent that has justice accessible to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. I look at what the East African Law Association is doing. They have what you call a pro bono service for those in society who are most vulnerable. So what these people do is that these legal minds do is that they are able to grant this service to vulnerable populations, and out of that you realize that because of some of the conflicts and the nature of their evolution, people would turn to the legal system for services as opposed to going into the bush. And this can be upscaled across the continent and have corporates support this. What we shall observe is that we shall have a more predictable climate. We shall have a more stable continent. Remember, for England to appreciate the second industrial revolution, one of the aspects that we saw quite manifest was the social contract. The respect of the social contract, whereby there is a very strong observation of the rule of law. And that is why we saw what we saw. So embracing that would really take us to the next level. Yes.
I mean, I with what you're raising, with these hopes, then comes the question of, okay, we want people who can embrace the rule of law strongly. We really want to take this model of the cross-border communities, which is strong sort of ties here that we're seeing. But then if I'm an investor or I'm someone who is doing business in Africa, I'm a young person who's thinking, okay, I'm about to graduate. Is this really the continent I want to work on? I'm thinking about all these things, right? I'm thinking about the concerns that I have for the continent. So it'd be interesting to know from you what's keeping you up at night in terms of the concerns you have for this continent in the next year, 5 years. What makes you worry that could kill all these aspirations?
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Come with the tough questions, Michael.
Yeah, you keep them coming in hot and fast, which is all right. I think for purposes of constructive dialogue, we should come in that format. I look at our youth.
Mm.
And right now I'm out of the youth bracket. And I look at my dad when he was youth. Yes, I'm out of the youth bracket. So, and I look at my dad when he was youth. Back then, somehow, they would cover the milestones of life at the right time.
Yeah.
They would say at this age, you would get married. Finish school at this age, get married. They would get employment. In fact, for them, they would choose jobs. They would get letters of offer. Then you talk of marriage, you talk of the milestone, taking children to school. They were able to educate us, and they didn't really take us. In my case, government facilities were quite functional. Right? We would go to clinics, government clinics. Today I look at the youth and I notice there's a growing concern.
Yeah.
Young men nowadays say they cannot afford to even say hi to a lady.
Yeah.
Because it is an expense that they cannot take up. Young men are also saying they cannot afford to have children because even they themselves cannot feed themselves. What we are seeing then is that there will be some degree of discontent.
Yeah.
This has got to be looked into critically. We have a youth that is quite woke, quite connected, and ready to run. It is for governments to direct them accordingly in the direction that they would like them to run by incentivizing them accordingly. Gone are the days when you had to report to a job physically. The young men now can work across the world, courtesy of the technological advancements we are seeing in the digital space. A well-skilled youth can mean an economic boom for the continent. A poorly skilled youth could lead to a lot of instability. Remember, most of the militia who are active across the region, from the Sahel to the east, go down to Mozambique, are mainly youth. Okay? And some are recruited at very tender ages. As the moment they hit the teen, and even younger. So my take is that if we are able to capacity build this critical mass, they can posture the continent to them for the next leap.
Yeah.
Yes, economically.
I mean, there's, from what you're just saying, right? The opportunities to skill the youth in Africa towards, economic booms, as you say, it's actually there because of the challenges the world is facing right now, the labor shortages that we are seeing coming up in the Gulf, in the European Union, is creating industries in healthcare and whatnot that we can actually skill people, send them, sort of do that information exchange. And those can be the future business leaders of tomorrow.
Indeed.
The aid cuts that we are seeing from the US are actually gaps where there are whole industries that can be filled as a result of there being a lack. And so when you say this, it's actually worrying as much as it is hopeful, because it means that where these gaps are is where the skills training, the capacity building you're speaking of actually be directed. So it's not like all the jobs are taken up in the world and we're like, oh, what are the youth going to do now? And as you mentioned, the digital transformation, it doesn't take much to make someone start going to work.
Correct.
Right?
Very true.
And so I guess for me, then if we have these remote jobs and these opportunities, what are some things, infrastructures we can really place, place to create those enabling conditions for a young person who says, okay, maybe I can't find a job in my immediate community, but I hear there's this remote thing. What do I do?
Brilliant. I look at the power of public-private partnerships as having a chance to support the young population or the youth take advantage of these jobs. Sometimes we sit back and say the state should provide, the state should provide. We do have corporate social responsibility acts in the various countries across the continent. Having agreements with corporates to support youth set up digital hubs is one approach that I believe would be a low-hanging fruit. In areas where we face challenges of electricity, the connection to the grid, we do have the option of solar. When you walk into your typical university, you will find youth from each and every corner of the nation or sometimes the continent. You go to University of South Africa, you go to University of Pretoria, you realize that there are youth from all over the continent in such a facility. So wherever you set up this hub, you will find that the kind of skilling that you require to do for the youth to take up these jobs, AI jobs, are very minimal. Equally, I look at the need to work with some of these big corporates that are into the manufacturing of computers to support some of these hubs and have methods where these hubs can slowly offset the payment of these computers. It happens in the health sector, whereby for some of these very technical and expensive equipment, sophisticated equipments, suppliers do give them to hospitals and come up with flexible terms of payment. So these are options, in my view, that can actually get us up and running. Yes.
Okay. So I have very important question for you.
I am all ears.
What's your favorite song?
Can I?
I know you like music. I know that. You have told me this.
Yes, I do. I love music. I love music. It is good for the soul, and it is good for the Lord.
Yeah.
If
If soft power has anything in it.
oh, indeed, music does work its wonders, and for the Christian aspect, there's a song called Yesu Mwema, translated as My Good Jesus. It's a Catholic song, where we sing, we are offering ourselves to the Lord. And we would like, to enjoy His love. All right, that is for the Christian one. For the secular one, I am a fan of one song by Franco, I think. It's called Très Impoli. Means very impolite. Basically, loosely translated as the song, basically, the lyrics talk of someone who is unrefined and uncouth and is not very well disciplined. In this case, one who walks into people's houses without knocking, one who talks to people without having brushed the teeth, and one who puts their feet on the table that is used to serve food. So just the humor in that song reminds me a lot about some of the songs my old man used to hum about. Yes.
I mean, with everything you're telling me, I can't help but wonder what keeps motivating you. Is there like a book or something you read that just stays with you and keeps you going with such the amazing work that you're doing? in very difficult contexts? Like, what is making you keep on going and not just pack up your bags, get a visa, move on with your life?
The kind of research actually I've done over the years has been in rather volatile zones. I've been in Lamu County where for a long time the Al-Shabaab have been active. I've been in the Eastern DRC where we all know what's happening. And what keeps me motivated is that for one to understand, as my dad would say, a good mechanic is one who would go under the car. They would understand everything that is going on under the vehicle. Would lie under the car rather. I feel that we need to do our best to make a better society for those we are going to leave behind. We are all on a relay. One day we shall leave this world. What shall we have left behind? So that someone one day will say, this is what Sitawa left for us. I have worked closely with the youth, and because they have a special place in my heart. While I was at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, I was the chairman of the rugby team. And we always believed in being our brothers' keepers. And I would ensure that the players, are do maintain a certain degree of discipline and equally thrive to perform in class to a certain level. For those who face turbulent times, I was available. We would talk. For those who had issues in appreciating the courses that they took, we would talk. And in some cases, I would even talk to parents on what their children, their sons need to do to get back on track. Why? Because the youth are the future. So that to me is something I take quite passionately. And I believe it is in the entire interest of a more stable continent.
But also rugby.
Mm-hmm.
Michael,
Yes.
2 questions.
Yes.
What is the position you play? But also, which team do you support? Think very carefully, Michael.
That coming from a South African also. Very well. Here goes nothing.
So we know which one you support.
Yes. In terms of the position, while I was in high school, I played 14.
Yeah.
I was a bit of a speed star then. I went to university, I played 11.
Yeah.
Then I also played number 8. And then I went to number 4.
Yeah.
There's a saying in rugby, the older you grow, you realize that the number on your jersey reduces. Okay? So at 14, you're quite fast.
Yeah.
Then as the legs grow older, they run slower.
Yeah.
And you take up positions that require more of a strength than speed.
Yeah.
So that's for the rugby positions. For the teams, I do support our Kenya rugby team.
Yeah.
Very closely. I am a good friend of the chairman, Sami Mutai.
Yeah.
I also had a chance to ref as a member of the Kenya Rugby Referees Society. At the national stage, 15 aside.
I can see how happy you are becoming. Like, you get so excited thinking about rugby.
Yeah, I believe sports does work, Mike.
Yeah.
For the 15s aside, I support the Springboks.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a very, very good thing to say.
Actually, it is true. And I supported it so much back in the years that even my own late dad, we would talk about Brian Habana. We would talk about Tendai Mtawarira.
Yeah.
We would talk about the likes of Percy Montgomery.
Yeah.
And we would discuss the South African rugby team as if we are South Africans, but we ain't. There's a lot that sports has to offer in terms of peace.
Yeah.
One of the projects that I've seen carried out in communities that are conflicting is bringing people together for sports tournaments.
Yeah.
And tell them, hey, let us play together. Let us just play together before we begin engaging in negotiations. And what I've seen people do is that, or facilities do is that at some point, the warring factions are then mixed up. So what happens is that if you and I have an issue, I'll have to pass the ball to you, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if you score, we celebrate together. So that tends to lighten moments. By the time people are sitting down to negotiate, there's a lot of camaraderie, and it actually does work magic.
Yeah.
So I believe sports is good.
Yeah.
Sports is good.
I think you've given us a lot to chew on here, Michael. From what you're saying, the onus is not just on politicians or diplomats to negotiate peace. There's really an opportunity with everyday things like rugby. Case in point, how happy you got when you're talking about the rugby. Activities that people can come together on, music, choirs, that kind of thing. There's really an opportunity there to use those avenues because everyone understands them to create peace. So I think, you've really given the high level people something to think about. Everyday people like me something to think about. And I really appreciate that.
You are most welcome.
Thank you for making the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me over.
No, of course.
Wonderful.
Of course.
Very well.
Thank you so much for watching. This is ALN Academy Storytime. I'm Rutendo Nyaku. Please like, share, subscribe, and bye.